between them. Rather than use a proper label, George marked each row with a notched stick and kept track in his diary of what each marking meant. He'd mixed different composts and soils in a large wooden box that was divided into sections. He wrote, "Mixed my composts in a box with 10 apartments in the following manner." 1760. He would toss horse manure in one part, cow manure in the second, and sheep manure in another. Then he would plant the same number of seeds in each section. Each day he would check on his experiment and write down what he saw. Which sprouts broke the soil first? How healthy did they look, and how fast did they grow? The best fertilizers were then used in the big fields. George believed that every experiment is a treasure, and he enjoyed sharing the results of his experiments with guests and neighbors who visited. They had the same problems. His dinner guests also complained about how expensive it was to ship their tobacco to England. They groaned about the new taxes they were forced to pay to the King of England. A tax on sugar, a tax on tea, on glass, paint, and lead. There was even a special stamp required for newspapers and documents. It seemed unfair for the colonists to pay such high taxes when they had no voice in the British government. George agreed. Each year he planted less and less tobacco, so he didn't have to ship it to England. Instead, he grew more and more wheat to sell to other colonists, potatoes, turnips, and other vegetables to feed his household, and flax to make cloth. Soon Mount Vernon was like a little village. Striding down the north lane, George could hear the whir of spinning wheels and the thwack of the looms as slaves and hired weavers wove cloth for blankets and clothing. Tap, tap, tap sounded the shoemaker's hammer, and loud clanging from the blacksmith's anvil echoed up from the stables. Nothing was purchased from England that could be made at Mount Vernon. As George made Mount Vernon less dependent on English goods, the colonists' grumblings grew louder. It was time for the colonies to break away from England, too. Although George loved Mount Vernon, too many people were calling for him to leave home to lead the colonies as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He could not refuse. In June 1775, General George Washington rode off to train his troops to fight the British. When he left, George thought, as all the soldiers did, that he would be home by Christmas. But he would not live at Mount Vernon again for more than 8 years. No matter where he was, George's thoughts were never far from home. When he was huddled in a drafty tent overlooking a battlefield or at a desk in a crowded inn, General George found time to write lengthy letters to his farm managers back home. The longest was 16 pages. Days before leading rows of soldiers into battle, he eased his mind by imagining where to plant rows of fruit trees. He wrote to his cousin Lund of his plans. "I mean to have groves of trees at each end of the dwelling house, to range in a line from the southeast corner to Colonel Fairfax's." 1776. And from his dismal makeshift headquarters in New Windsor, New York, he could imagine a brighter future at home. "How many lambs have you had this spring? How many colts are you like to have? An account of these things would be satisfactory to me, as I have these kind of improvements very much at heart." 1781. Finally, on Christmas Eve, 1783, a victorious George Washington trotted up the road to Mount Vernon. He had won the war, and now looked forward to living as a simple farmer again. But his farms looked shabby, and his fields looked tired. He tried new mixes of fertilizer, plaster of Paris, black muck from the swamp, and fish heads. He even looked into pulling mud from the bottom of the Potomac River with a new machine called the hippopotamus. George may have missed being a general, though, for he plotted and planted trees as if they were soldiers on a battlefield. Redbud and dogwood trees guarded the house. Magnolias and black locusts shielded the servants' quarters, and weeping willows and oaks stood sentinel along the roads. And wherever he traveled, he brought back